guys ready?
Ready.
Welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started with our program here. So first of all, we want to remind everyone to silence their cell phones. We appreciate that. You can still use them, do whatever you want, but just turn the volume down on it. It's a little disoriented when they ring and someone's in the middle of speaking. So we appreciate that. So the first thing on our list is to do a proclamation. So my mouse has stopped working. Thankfully, I have it here. Okay. So this is acknowledgement of areas affected by Hurricane Harvey. Whereas on August 25th, 2017, Hurricane Harvey, the fiercest hurricane to hit the United States in 13 years, and the strongest hurricane to hit Texas since Hurricane Carla in 1961, struck Rockport, Texas, damaging or destroying hundreds of homes, apartments, businesses, churches, and government offices, and killing at least one Rockport resident. And whereas the devastating flooding happening in Houston and Harris County, as well as other communities along the Gulf Coast, is beyond comprehension. And whereas watching our country come together in support of those who are injured and helping total strangers in need reaffirms that the overarching nature of Americans is to be kind and not hate. And whereas the City of Lawrence joins the country in offering our condolences for the lives lost and our support to the communities affected by Hurricane Harvey as they heal from this tragedy. Now, therefore, the Lawrence City Commission extends our heartfelt love and support to the communities affected by this horrific disaster. I'm sure a lot of people have family there. I do. It's pretty unfortunate. A little scary. All right, so now we'll go on to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled off the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Is there any item that a member of the commission wishes to pull from the consent agenda for further discussion? Is there an item that a member of the public wishes to pull from the consent agenda?
I would like guess 12A.
12?
Traffic calming on Forest Avenue.
Okay. Any other item a member of the public wishes to remove? Okay. So with the exception of 12A, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda with the addition of claims for a total of 490 vendors for a total amount of $6,116,724.28.
Move approval.
Second.
All right, so motion made by Commissioner Amick, seconded by Vice Mayor Boley. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Will you pass this down to Sherry, please? All right, so let me read 12A here. 12A, so recommendations from the Transportation Commission: approve request for traffic calming on Forest Avenue between Barker Avenue and Leonard Avenue. Some people say Leonard. I say Leonard. What do you say?
Leonard.
Leonard? What do you say, Diane?
Just to be difficult.
Leonard? I say it wrong then. All right. Leonard. Did you have any questions? Come up to the microphone and ask away. We could talk about Osdall, but I won't.
Okay, my name's Chris Flowers, and I am a delivery driver in Lawrence. Well, I guess on the memo, it said that there is a meeting, am I right in that it was originally, they were going to deny it, then there was a meeting and a handful of residents spoke up, and then the city changed their mind?
I don't know. Let's hear your questions and then we'll get answers from staff.
Well, can I just read what I wrote?
Okay.
Yeah.
Chuck, do you
Sorry.
happen to remember that off the top of your
Okay.
head?
Sorry.
Just a second. Sorry. While you're looking, I figure I might as well ask Chuck. Do you remember about the meeting? Were you at the meeting?
I wasn't at the meeting, but typically the way this works is the denial is just staff recommendation to the Transportation Commission.
Commission, the neighbors were notified. The neighbors came in and voiced their support for it.
At the Transportation Commission?
At the there wasn't a separate meeting,
Okay,
but at the Transportation Commission meeting, and the Transportation Commission moved to recommend that the commission support it.
okay.
Okay. Speed bumps slow down emergency response time. That's a fact. As a delivery driver, this worries me. Delivery driving is one of the more dangerous jobs in America. We are more likely to be hit by a drunk driver, robbed, or get into an altercation with someone drunk or drugged out as opposed to most jobs. I've known drivers who have been hit by drunks. I knew a couple of drivers who were robbed. I myself had to call police once when this drugged out guy came outside yelling at me, waving a broom over his head. I've worked 3 different delivery jobs in Lawrence, and at all 3 I've delivered to Forest Avenue. I also know that in some houses east of Barker, there's probably hard drug use going on. The last thing I need is having to wait any extra time with another crazy guy with a broom. But anyway, and then when I read the memo online, it said that 3 residents spoke in favor of the traffic calming devices. I'm guessing speed humps. But I just think it's kind of crazy that a handful of people speak up and then the city changes its mind, and now hundreds of delivery drivers and taxi drivers are going to have unsafer work environments, and the taxpayers are going to pay $8,000 for something that's not needed. And also, I do remember reading that it said that the city originally denied or was going to deny it because of low traffic count, and that the current people were currently going under the posted speed limit. So I just think this seems a bit wasteful, and it's going to put others at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any other public comment on that item? Okay. So he mentioned something about speeds on Forest.
Yeah, onto the microphone. It looks like from the report that the 85th percentile speed is only 28 miles per hour. The speed limit is 30 miles an hour unless otherwise posted. So the 85th percentile speed is a couple miles an hour below what our policy would recommend. Our traffic calming policy says 5 miles an hour above this posted speed limit would be a warrant. It's just a local policy. It's not anything that we are, required by any law other than local policies to follow. And the traffic volume didn't warrant it. It was under 1,000. However, the neighbors cited that they don't have sidewalks, and it's a residential area, and cut through traffic is a problem for them and a concern. So they went ahead, and the Transportation Commission again recommended to present their recommendation for approval to the commission.
Chuck.
Okay, go ahead.
Excuse me, Mayor. Chuck, we have 2 streets there that are between Barker and Leonard. One is Johnson Avenue and one's Forest, and
Probably similar.
even though that there's only, we're talking about 171 vehicles a day, I think was the volume of traffic that's going up and down through there. I think it's probably all, probably 10% of that may be the residents, that live along that. The rest is probably cut through traffic that's going between the Barker and Leonard area. So I think that that coupled along with the no sidewalks on those sides of the streets there, I think is probably something that
Yeah.
traffic safety seemed to, or our traffic commission seemed to take into great deal of consideration. So.
Yeah.
And this is a street that's 20 feet wide, right?
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't have any curb and gutter. It's just an old chip seal. Maybe had an overlay on it at one point. So yeah, it's a narrow street. As far as the emergency response times, we've coordinated these with police and fire, mostly fire. Their biggest concern, it's not about their response time, it's about patient comfort. If they get an ambulance there, then if they have to drive over those, there may be some jostling of the vehicle. They're not meant to, our speed humps, Ted Boyle can attest, they're not so severe that they're going to jostle your teeth, because we don't want people damaging their vehicles. But they catch people's attention if they're cutting through or driving, and it's a deterrent. If people don't like them, they're going to not use that road. They'll use Johnson Drive, and we may get the similar request. Odds are it's probably a lot of the neighborhood traffic, but there's not that many neighbors on that road either. And at least 3 of them came to the meeting, so, and nobody came to oppose it. They were all notified.
Any other questions for staff?
Just one comment. One of the things that I did see when I went out and watched it the other day, the traffic that I saw go through there, I didn't see anybody pulling off into a driveway. So I think everything I saw was pretty much cut through, so just passing that on.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Any other discussion by the commission? Well, I would entertain a motion to approve or disapprove. Someone speak up.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Larson, seconded by Vice Mayor Boley. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Chris. Any other public comment items? Wait, that was consent agenda. I'm skipping ahead, sorry. Okay, so we finished the consent agenda. And now we're going to move on to public comment. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues that are not scheduled on the agenda. After first being recognized by the mayor, each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss, debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments, questions to the commission. Is there anyone here that has come on up?
Thank you. My name is Chris Berger, and just 2 matters to address. The first one I forgot to ask to come off the consent agenda. It just has to do with re-examination of all the building and construction codes. I think it's the 2018 that's going to be redone yet again, and just ask that there be some temperance that's put into that process, because I know we've talked a lot about affordable housing and what can be done. Every time there's a change in the code, that only increases the costs of residential construction. And when that happens, then things become less affordable. So even though there might be the most noble of intentions, when there are those changes and even just a voluminous discussion, it turns into more expense and a more difficult place for people to afford housing. And then that segues into my second thing, which I have to depart early. So there's a commission item with regard to new taxes, or the taxes to be reissued.
If it has to be, if this is something that you're talking about that's on the regular agenda, number 2 or 3, no, number 3 has to do, then the public comment would occur during that
Yes.
item.
I'm
So,
unable to attend, however.
okay, well,
So I'll just address it in the next minute and 45 seconds.
well, it's just against our process.
Well,
So I've cut people off before for not
Correct.
speaking during the regular
and
time.
I appreciate that.
So it'll probably be like an hour or so.
Correct, and I will not
Maybe
be able
you
to
can
attend.
come back.
So I'll just say in my 3 minutes,
I'm gonna have to cut you off.
you do not allow me to address the commission.
Well, it's not
With
that
regard
I'm
to
not
a matter
allowing you,
that's
it's
of public
just
comment.
that this is not the time for an item that's on our regular agenda, which is number 3.
You are the mayor, I have to follow what you're saying.
I appreciate it. And we always take emails or phone calls or
True.
voicemails, so
There's always something
speaking
useful
Tuesday
in
night is not
having
your
a public
only
comment.
option.
So maybe my public comment for the next 42 seconds then, 52 seconds, would simply be on how important it is that when someone has a comment to make, that they be allowed to address the commission in its entirety. You set a limit on 3 minutes, which is a very short period of time. And if someone's personal schedule doesn't allow them to attend, it really is not an inconvenience to the commission
That's why we have voicemail and phone calls. I
to
appreciate
allow
your comment.
the person to address the commission.
I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Well, there are other individuals. Mr. Amix?
Could I respond just to one item? 3 weeks ago, we did discuss with Scott during our regular session, just so that you know, as we look at the change in the codes, we did talk about the need at this time and whether or not the various boards were going to be actually considering going to the 2018 code or whatever year it may be. So we have had, as a commission, have had that discussion over the last several weeks. I wanted you to know that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other public comment? This is for items not on the agenda at all. All right, so let's go on to the regular agenda. Addressing the commission, the public is allowed to speak to any regular agenda item or give public comment. After first being recognized by the mayor, each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments, questions to the commission. And of course, we have agendas over there on the podium by the back door if anyone does not already have one. So number 1, we are going to talk about potentially a community police review board.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Maria Garcia, Assistant City Attorney. My remarks will be brief. As you can see from the agenda memo, we have incorporated 2 changes that the Commission requested at our meeting in May on this very same ordinance. One of them was that the Commission requested term limits to be included for board members, so we've included some language under Section 1-2509 that would state that every board member is allowed to serve 2 consecutive 3-year terms, if that's acceptable to the commission. The second requested change was to clarify that the board members would meet periodically unless there weren't agenda items to discuss, and the purpose of that request was to make sure that the board members don't waste their time at meetings when there's nothing to talk about. Otherwise, there were a couple of additional requests that were made by LPOA. There are some representatives here from LPOA, so I'll defer those comments to them. Staff did, though I'd like to point out, meet with LPOA after the May meeting at the City Commission's direction, so we have been in communication with them. One final remark that I'll make is a request in the staff memo for direction on when, if this ordinance is adopted, when the Commission would want it to take effect. I just point out that if the ordinance is adopted, we'll have a board of 7 new members. There will have to be an application process for that, a selection process, and the background check, so it will take a number of months to complete that. So if you could please keep that in mind, that would be helpful. And I'll stand for questions, and if there are none, I'll defer to LPOA.
Any questions?
I had a few questions on, on the ordinance itself.
Sure.
Under the purpose of the board, it indicates that it's related to, communications related to racial or other bias-based policing. And then you go below that and it talks about definitions. And I noticed it includes in there unreasonable use of race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, or religion. Does that include also gender identity? Is that part of that?
Not under state statute, and that's where we've
Okay.
gotten this definition from. We do have gender identity in a section of our city code, which you might be thinking of, but it's not part of the definition under state statute.
Okay. How about the term unreasonable, since that's part of the definition? Is there a definition for unreasonable?
Not in the state statute, but I know that, for example, the Attorney General has given direction on what unreasonable use of those factors are. So an officer that uses somebody's race or their gender over the radio to describe a subject, maybe fleeing a scene, for example, that's not an unreasonable use of their race for taking action, but otherwise the term is not defined.
Okay. All right. Let me see what else I have. I think that's it for right now. Let me just look at this more.
I guess mine's a follow-up. So she was mentioning the inclusion of gender identity, and you said that's not a state definition, but we have it in our local. So do we have to follow the state and their definition? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the gender identity is brought up in Chapter 10 of our city code. I'm not sure if Commissioner Larson, that's where you were thinking of.
Yeah, I knew it was in city code.
That term, that has nothing to do with the racial or other bias-based policing investigations. It's just the term where it's found in our city code. But like I said, we got this definition from state statute, so that's how.
Does it have to be limited to state statute?
It doesn't. The way that we define what's included, it does not have to follow state statute. It's a recommendation merely by staff.
Okay. I would be interested in possibly having that be part of our definition.
Okay.
I would too. Any other questions for staff?
I got one more. On page 5, it's under 1-2506 qualifications, item number B2. Not sure what it's A. It says that there would be a bias-based police training for the board members. Is that correct?
Yes.
Where would that be done, and who would do that?
We're anticipating that the members of the police department would do that. There's currently training for current police officers on similar training, unless we receive direction from you otherwise, but that's who we'd have in mind right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay. And then also on the 1-2507 under confidentiality, is there a possibility that a board member could be subpoenaed under the confidentiality, and would they be able to be subpoenaed, I guess?
Yes, so the confidentiality subsection here discusses that the board member has to follow it. And then if you'll refer to the confidentiality agreement that was posted as well, it states that the board members cannot divulge any information that they receive
Right.
during investigations unless otherwise required by law.
Okay.
And a subpoena, if it's validly issued, is going to come from a court. And so that would be considered as required by law. So they would not be in violation of this agreement by responding.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, under the terms 1-2509, where it talks about voting members and their behavior, it says that the mayor with the majority consent of the city commission shall have the ability to remove a member for reasons of just cause, including but not limited to poor attendance, violation of the confidentiality requirements, or personal conduct inconsistent with the expectations of the city of Lawrence. What sorts of grounds are we looking to define there in terms of, is this behavior at the meeting, or would this include behavior outside of the actual meeting itself?
So I would probably refer to the qualifications that would get a board member on the board in the first place, and one of the major points of that is a criminal background check. So personal conduct that reflects poorly on the board. It could include maybe new criminal conduct that didn't happen before the board member was appointed, but now has occurred once they are appointed. We leave that language intentionally broad to fit a number of different
Okay.
scenarios, so I can't give solid examples,
Sure.
but it's written like that
Okay.
intentionally.
That was my question also.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
good.
Okay, I got one more, Leslie.
Please, go ahead.
So the meetings will be held quarterly. Who sets the agenda for the meetings, and how does a person get something on the agenda?
That will be, I anticipate that will be part of the bylaws that have yet to be written for the board. I'm not sure if maybe Rhodes could address how it's done currently, and then that might be for the current board, which is going to be dissolved if this ordinance is passed, but I anticipate that will be part of bylaws that are yet to be written.
Because I know there's been some concern expressed on the current board that setting the agenda or getting items on the agenda has been difficult or not addressed.
By
really,
members of the public?
by members even of the board.
Okay.
So that would be something I would be interested in making sure we have a clear understanding of how that's done and it's done in a fair manner.
Okay.
And will those bylaws come back to the city commission for approval, or will those be handled by the board itself?
Generally, they'll have to be approved by the board. I know that there is an effort right now to make bylaws consistent among different boards in the city, and so that will be used as a template for this particular board with some additional language specific to the board. And so the approval of that will just be consistent with how all the other boards are going to approve it. But generally, it's just going to be through the board.
Mayor, one other one. The,
However, you could ask that it be brought back to the commission for your review and approval, which
Well-
I think in this particular case would make a lot of sense to do that.
and it may, you know, after the discussion this evening, that may be one of the things that we want to do, but if we are going to be consistent with, you know, policy throughout our boards, maybe we look at it that way also. But I think that we need to have that discussion as to where we want to head and where that final approval rests, probably at this board. Maria, I did have a question about the terms. Are those staggered terms? They are?
So, let's see, it said 2 full 3-year terms. Yes, and, I'm sorry.
If I could just point out on your last question, Commissioner Amix, on page 6, section 1-2511, the very last sentence of that section says that the board shall adopt any lawful rules, regulations, and bylaws. Such rules, regulations, and bylaws shall be submitted to the city commission
Got it.
and shall become effective upon approval by the city commission. So that's in
Thank you.
there.
Thank you.
but it would be 2 consecutive terms. So a member could serve 2 terms, take time off for a term, and then reapply to be a board member.
Would we, all of the new members of the board, would they be appointed at the same time and then potentially come off at the same time? I think that's kind of, is that where you were going with that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that there was, you know, the first ones, you know, have the, yeah, they have staggered
Okay.
terms where you keep a majority of the board in place. You're constantly replacing new so that they can start
That-
going through the process. I just want to make sure we're not replacing an entire board at one time.
So under 2509, it doesn't directly answer your question. If that's what the commission would like to do, stagger it in a certain way, that is certainly permissible under the current language. And you're, you know,
Well,
free to change that.
as I read this, one of the things that I was concerned about is that the mayor would be asked to replace the entire board at one
Every-
time, and
every
I don't
3
think
years.
that would be good.
Yeah, I don't think that's appropriate. Perhaps there's some kind of starting. I know that we just did it for another board.
The Transportation Commission.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe something similar can be done.
Yeah. I think that was actually in the ordinance.
That the terms will be staggered?
Yeah, I think there were some provisions for temporary terms, which might not be necessarily appropriate here.
Yeah, it does say, it does mention temporary terms, that a board member could be appointed to fill a partial term, and then they would be allowed to serve 2 additional terms after that, in addition to the partial term.
Any other questions for staff?
I just want one follow-up, if that's okay. Going back to the training, which would be done by the Lawrence Police Department, is that a certified program that they have for bias training, or is it something that they've developed themselves as under policy?
I'm sorry, I missed the very first part of your question.
Under the police training, the bias-based
Oh,
police training is that a certified program, like a national program, or is that something that's developed by our police department? Is it?
I'll have interim chief answer that.
That program it was actually taught to them at KLETC, and it's originally from Dr. Lori Friedel. And so I believe it's a national program at this point. And to answer your other question about who sets the agenda, the board has been setting their agenda. Oftentimes we'll provide information to them about items that we may have of interest to for them to discuss, but they set their own agenda, or they at least did for the former board.
Okay, so the training itself, is there a certification that they receive when they're done, or is it just?
Well, they received it's a certificate, so that would be a certification. I think it was a 40-hour training, so they could be train the trainers for
Okay.
this particular type. And what it is, what it originated out of is they train. One of the premises of it is that everybody has biases. You recognize your biases, and so that's how it's taught within the department. And then also there's the legal portion of what you can and can't do based on existing law.
Okay, thank you, Anthony.
I just went out and checked the Transportation Commission. The staggered terms was in the bylaws, not in the actual resolution. So we could accomplish that with the bylaws for this body as well.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Did you have more questions about the training? Do you think
Well, I
that's
just wanted to
enough?
make sure that we were following some national certification or some national program sounds like that's what we're doing, so that's what I think is important, yes.
Okay,
I figured they would be, but just thought I'd ask.
sure. Any other questions for staff?
Question for you, Mayor. The items that LPOA brought up, are we going to bring those up after they present those, or?
Well, I
that
figured after
discussion?
staff, we could have them come up and talk.
Okay.
And then we would go to public comment.
All right.
Does that sound good?
No, that's fine. I was going to bring those up now, but no, that's fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
So any other questions?
Stay.
We'll have more time for questions.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's have LPOA come up and tell us their concerns. Or maybe things you like.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Drew Fennelly. I'm the chairman of the Lawrence Police Officers Association. I am here tonight representing the members of the Lawrence Police Officers Association. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this tonight. I just want to say first that we're thankful for the opportunity that we've had with the city manager's office and the city attorney's office to have a discussion about these items. I feel like the city attorney's office came up with a pretty good ordinance here. There are a few items that we would like to see added or changed in the ordinance, which are detailed in the city attorney's memo. The first one would be in section 1-2502, the purpose of the board. There in the middle, it says, second, the board may provide an independent, accessible, and efficient means for which the public may submit a complaint of alleged police misconduct. We would just ask that members be added to that section to allow the individual members to also receive a complaint so that it doesn't have to be given to the entire board all at once. I think that makes it it makes it easier for people to make those complaints rather than having to give it in front of the entire board. One of the other changes that we had talked about asking be included was in the confidentiality section of the ordinance, which is section 1-2507. In the first sentence, it says board members participating in the appeal of a complaint related to racial or other bias-based policing from a citizen shall sign a non-disclosure statement indicating such members' agreement to protect the privacy of officers involved in the confidentiality of the board's proceedings. We would ask that would also include a statement about or in the receipt of any complaints, since that is one of the functions of the board to receive the complaints. We think it would be appropriate that the breach of privacy be in place for receiving any type of complaint, not just a complaint about racial or other bias-based policing. As far as public comment goes, we had a discussion about this at our August 10th meeting of our members. And the discussion that we had is our concern is that people will use that opportunity to make their complaints in a public setting. We think that's not the appropriate way to do that. The whole idea behind this board is to create a way for people to have an accessible way of making a complaint, and the appropriate way to do that is in a confidential setting. Our fear is that if allowed to happen, people who are on the board who are inexperienced in running a public meeting would be hesitant to stop that from occurring. And so limiting that would stop that from happening to begin with. Our fear is that once that information is shared in a public meeting, then you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And if people are discussing items involving specific officers, that's information that is, could be unsubstantiated, or it very well may be true, but, police officers have to be allowed the same rights under due process that the general citizens are allowed to have, and that's complicated if that discussion is had in public, which is not the appropriate place to have that. We also fear that that could open up the city to additional liabilities in its obligations to protect officers' privacy during internal affairs investigations. And then the board, as an extension of the city, would essentially be undermining that section of our contract. And so those are the changes that we're requesting. Other than that, we think the ordinance is very fair and addresses a lot of the concerns that were brought forth at the beginning of this process.
Okay. Any questions for the chairman? That was your title, right, Chairman?
Mm-hmm.
I have one. Okay, so there will not be, like on our agenda this evening, there is not, under what you're asking, is there is not a section that is just general public comment at all, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that the only thing that members of the public can have public comment on are things that are on the written agenda.
Correct. As the resolution is as the ordinance is laid out, the opportunity to have a discussion about items on the agenda would be there. I think the whole idea behind the board is to have them be approachable and accessible for members of the public to have items placed on the agenda, and then that would be the appropriate time to have those discussions.
Okay, let me ask another question then. Would you think it appropriate that there be a section on the agenda for the board to entertain future agenda items?
I think that would be appropriate, yes.
Okay?
Would those future agenda items come from board members, or would it come from the public?
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, I don't.
Because
I think
if you open it up to the public, that effectively becomes a public comment section at the end instead of the beginning.
well, it's a request, you know, I suppose at an end of a meeting is what I'm thinking of. It's a request, or it's an opportunity for the public to make requests for future agenda items, or, you know, whoever's there to make.
I think if
agenda
there's and again, that would go back to the bylaws for the board. I think if there was a policy in place to not have discussion on those items as they're brought forth, I think that would be the appropriate way to address them.
I just want to make sure we're saying the same thing here.
I think there's less likelihood of that becoming an issue in a discussion of future agenda items than it would have in a general public comment setting.
I appreciate, I want you to know, I appreciate your concern for, you know, the officer involved, you know, or potential officer involved if a complaint was to come forward under general public comment. And you know, that protection is deserved. I think my concern here, one of the things that I need to bring up, and we need to have discussion as a board with you and other members of the public, is there an appropriate place on agenda that, you know, people can come forward to make a request of a future agenda item without getting into that complaint-based where there's already some kind of program, you know, that is set up through the bylaws, you know, that people can make a, you know, a complaint. So I just want to make sure that that opportunity is there. So.
Yeah.
Implicit, actually explicit in your argument is your concern that the board won't function as is outlined in the ordinance. That the person who's running the meeting won't be able to essentially keep the public comment from becoming a specific complaint section. Are there things that the city could do to increase the confidence of the LPOA in the ability to do that? One thing I think of is having the city attorney's office represented in these meetings, with the idea that there would be some backup if needed. As Sherry does time for the mayor, the city attorney could say, board chair, is it possible that, you know, you need to, you know, make sure that we're following the ordinance with this meeting?
Sorry, go ahead.
I don't know if that, I guess I'm inviting a response.
I think what it goes back to is there's no opportunity for that bell to be unrung once it happens. Once an officer's name is used during general public comment, then that information is out there, and the safeguards in place to protect the officer's privacy have already failed. I think there's significant avenues outside of general public comment that allow people to address those concerns with the board, reach out to board members, and as I understand it, if it's still the case, board members' contact information is publicly available on the city's website, I believe. I think contacting those board members is the appropriate way to do that. It's limiting the opportunities for that to occur and mitigating that from happening, because if there's opportunities there for it to happen, then it's more likely to happen. So this would be decreasing the likelihood that it would.
Okay. If the board is unable to take public comment, how will that affect the responsibility to assist the police department with community outreach opportunities involving racial or other bias-based policing prevention?
I don't think it's not totally eliminating the opportunity for public comment. It's eliminating the opportunity for general public comment on items that aren't on the agenda. I think the appropriate way to address that is by having the opportunity to request the board place items on the agenda to have a discussion about those items.
Well, sometimes there needs to be a more immediate response than the next meeting along. Concerns in the public can come up and they need to be addressed. And I guess one of the things that I'm thinking of is something that's in the news in another part of the country or the country as a whole. And example for me is the pardon of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. I think there are people in our community who are very concerned about what's happening with our police and our city as this is happening in the country. And this board would be an opportunity for people to say, what does this police force do with regard to these? I mean, how do we view these issues that are on the national stage? And that might not be able to wait for the next meeting. Would you say, oh, we'll schedule something to talk about that a month from now?
Well, I guess I imagine that would be brought to the board's attention prior to the meeting. It could be added to the agenda. I don't know why they couldn't be contacted to do that.
Okay.
And also, the meetings right now, the way I read it, are scheduled for quarterly at the quarterly meetings. So if you have a future agenda item 3 months out, that kind of would negate taking care of something quickly. I don't know how to do that.
Well, it seems like your questions have more to do with kind of overall community policing.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is there a way to make the general public comment safeguards more robust so that we can actually go ahead and do general public comment and feel like, we have safeguards?
You could have an admonition at the beginning of general public comment to restrict any reference to any particular specific officer. You can build those into your rules of procedure.
Right.
I think the distinction I'm hearing in this conversation is that there's issues of general concern, and I think what I hear Officer Fenley talking about are issues that relate to having a name of an officer put out there about a particular incident. And I think one of the name of this is the Community Police Review Board. And the reason for that is to give the community another avenue to address community concerns and to allow someone to file a complaint that might otherwise be repelled from filing a complaint because they don't have confidence or trust in going to specifically the police department. So I think I think there has to be an arm's length kind of distance between the review board and the police, recognizing though at the end of the day that they are pretty much connected and they have to function together. But in terms of the community, what I'm hearing is a line of distinction here are general concerns.
Exactly.
And you brought up that some of those are so contemporary that they can't be kicked for another 3 months.
That's my concern.
And I think that that's a comfort issue in the community. You have to allow that sort of thing to be discussed. Now, the officer's right. You're going to have a strong chair, just like we had a conversation here, because you're going to be tested where the mayor had to abide by the rules of procedure, which didn't make a member of the citizenry very happy. You saw that just this evening. That's part of the process. That's part of the learning curve. The reality is, it isn't, the risk isn't just at this meeting. That risk exists 24/7, that somebody's going to come out and name an officer in a public setting for doing something incorrectly. And that's going to continue to happen. It happens now. So I think it's more important to have a procedure that gives all appearances and reality of allowing general type discussion with an admonition at the beginning of that commentary section that it's not to name officers or individuals, that there's a specific process baked into this ordinance to allow that to happen. And I think that's the distinction. I think we're getting things kind of crossed over here about what we can and we can't do, and we stand the risk of almost being accused of censorship by not allowing that discourse to happen in a public setting. And I don't think that has to happen. I think what I see generally in this ordinance will work. And I think you have to let it work. And I think, like most ordinances, they're prone to be changed and likely will be changed as we learn more and gain more experience and exposure to how they get used. Look, the LPOA isn't going to go away. They're going to be monitoring this. When they see an egregious activity happening that they're not happy about, they aren't shy about those things. They're going to let us know. The ordinance can be changed to reflect that. So I think that once this ordinance is passed, the next big step is the rules of procedure, get those refined. Again, the LPOA is going to have a chance to weigh in and make their comments about them. I wish the public had been more engaged in this process, quite frankly, and letting their issues be known. But, you know, that's your role in this particular case, to represent that view and protect the rights of the public in all of this. I don't think the police have to be afraid that this is going to create damage for them. I haven't seen it work that way. In fact, I hope that it helps to create an additional bridge, because I think a lot of times the complaints I heard when I saw this and observed this process work was more a communication problem than a reality problem. Rumors get out in the public. This is a way to dispel those rumors, to have the police come in and explain, no, this is the procedure we follow, this is what we do, this is how we deal with these issues. And so I think it's a better medium to communicate that way, and having the police trust that process, I think, is critical in making it successful as well.
I see this as people, I mean, we're not an island, we're in a nation, and people see things from all around, and they're going to wonder how our police force handles that, and this is a way for them to say, what do we do with that? How do we handle that? And for you guys to be able to explain, because you guys do a great job, and I think you can explain it really well. So,
Maybe. Tom, with what you brought up a second ago, though, you know, and I agree with all of that. My main concern is, as I said here, as an elected official, and I've got a responsibility to the public to make sure that they have access and being able to do everything that they do. But I share equally that I have a responsibility for that line officer that's out there, and to make sure that they are giving every bit of due diligence, in doing their job, and make sure that they're protected throughout an entire process. You're saying that can be done, but as you go to this meeting, the person that comes forward and says, but, Officer Joe or whoever it may be, did this, and then the board chair says, no, this is not the place to be doing that. That name is out.
You know what, that can happen right now. That can happen in our public venue process. We don't have any provision that prevents that. And quite frankly, until this conversation tonight, that probably would have slipped by, and you would have referred it to me, and I would have referred it to the chief to pursue it. So that stuff happens. I think there's more a chance that it's going to happen probably with a board like this that we're creating, that allows the community to be more engaged in those kinds of conversations. One of the things I'm used to is an annual report was conducted through this process. And so that annual report would talk about police stops and the racial profile. You know, your department does an incredible job on reporting out certain things. This would be a good venue for those types of things to happen, in my opinion. So I think that there's always the risk that somebody's going to say something about an officer. I mean, but that's happening right now. Every time we have an incident, in fact, we're dealing with one as we speak, people are asking about a particular officer. You know, we have to be very careful to protect the officer and the process to investigate and determine what happened. And that happens in my office, it happens in legal, it happens in PD, it happens in almost all of our departments right now. So people's names are getting brought into things, sometimes prematurely, and that's unfair, it's unfortunate. I think that about my own name sometimes, but that's kind of the reality of what public life is like. And so we have to do what we do as well as we can to protect those names, and I think the rules of procedure can identify that, and I think just as we read under public comment what public comment is for, before we allow public comment every time, that should be baked into our rules of procedure to talk about protecting individuals. We have a process, it's confidential, here's how you do that part. This part for public comment is about general concerns with the way our police department operates. I think that can work.
Officer Fennelly, that's actually a good segue from what Tom just said. And I'm going to ask you to speak for the LPOA, realizing that you haven't had an opportunity to discuss it with them this evening, but what would your feeling be towards the addition of language in the actual meeting minutes, similar to what we do at a commission meeting, where we say addressing the commission, the public is allowed to speak to any item that are not scheduled in the agenda, yada, 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 using the following language, and I'm pulling this language straight out of 1-2502, purpose of the board, including the language to read as follows. The board provides an independent, accessible, and efficient means for which the public may submit a complaint or alleged police misconduct in a confidential manner. As such, no complaints of alleged police misconduct are to be offered up during public comment.
I understand what you're saying. That we actually had a discussion about that very specific thing in our discussions with the city attorney's office. Our concern with that is we have people who aren't elected to the position. They aren't familiar with the processes that we go through, especially in the city commission room. And as public officials who are elected, you all are able to be held accountable for those things when they occur. If there was a discussion in the public comment section at a city commission meeting about a specific officer, we would expect that the mayor would put a stop to that, but we would also expect that we would hold you all accountable if that process did not take place. The people that are on this board are not elected to serve in those positions. They're not in a position to be held accountable by the general public. They're only in a position to be held accountable by the city commission. And so our faith in that process would be upheld in the appropriate way is not guaranteed, for lack of a better word, and we would have no ability for remediation in that instance.
Well, actually, you would, I think. And it goes back to the ordinance saying that the mayor or the commission can remove anybody from the board. So if there's a complaint lodged against a board member, then it could go back to the commission, and the commission could pull that board member off.
I don't feel that remediation would be adequate for the officer who would be, the discussion would be the topic of.
You know, I sit here and listen to that, and I think, and Drew is kind of our social media guru from the police department, and I think, you know, people are running around with cameras watching everything our officers do, shooting film of them constantly. They're saying things online constantly. They're exposing our officers on all sorts of levels. And at the end of the day, there's a due process for an officer to, you know, to have to go through, like anybody that's in the process has to go through. And it seems like that there's a lot greater risk in that regard than something happening here where the intentions are stated to be good intentions to begin with. I think with the evolution of social media and communication, the way it works now, the officers, you know, if the officer's involved in something, and people are going to out that officer, it's likely to happen way before a CPRB board meeting occurs every quarter, in my opinion.
Yeah, it just seems to me too, you can put all the policies, procedures in place you want, and write rules and regulations forever, but it's not going to negate somebody from the public getting up and just saying what they want to say, regardless of whether it's during a public comment period or any other period. So that it is tough. I think we do need to protect our officers. I agree with that statement and protect the privacy of the officers. But we can only put so many measures in place to protect that. Somebody can still come up and say whatever they want.
And do.
And do, yeah.
Like we saw tonight.
Yeah.
It's a good example tonight.
That's a tough one.
One thing I did not state that I should have is at that August 10th meeting, we did have a discussion on our support for this ordinance, and we did vote unanimously to support the ordinance with the changes that we proposed.
Thank you.
Well, if there's not any other questions for the chairman, we'll go on to public comment. All right, so public comment. Come on up and sign in. State your name. You have 3 minutes. We appreciate it if you please stay under 3 minutes. I don't like cutting people off. It's not fun.
Question, is this public comment on statement number 1 in the regular agenda items?
This is for
Just for the
item
police
number
board.
1,
Okay,
which I believe we're just still on item number 1, right?
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Katie Walsh. I'm speaking only for myself. I've been at 2 city commission meetings where people came up during public comment to out 2 different officers 2 different times, and it was referred back to city staff. It happens. I mean, people could be outside with signs with the officer's name on it as the board members walk into their meeting. I mean, you know, so I happen to agree with Mr. Marcus that I think with social media, I don't think it's a concern. You're going to be outed that day. All of you have been ravaged on social media. I have. You know how it goes. On terms, staggered terms, some boards do 1, 2, and 3-year terms so that not everybody comes off. I don't think, Commissioner Larson, you ever really got your question answered about whether Dr. Lloyd Friedell's anti-bias training is actually certified. You get a certificate, but we don't really know if it's certified, you know.
Yeah, I was gonna inquire more about that.
Yeah, I had to go
afterwards,
home
yeah.
and study him, so whatever. And that's all I have to say. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, KT. Any other public comment?
Can we have Anthony get up there?
Well,
So I stepped outside to talk to Officer Derek Smith for a second. Officer Smith is one of our 2 instructors for the fair and partial policing, and he let me know that it's now a national program. That's what places all across the country are using.
thank you, Captain.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Nanda, longtime listener, first-time commenter. But I did feel like I wanted to acknowledge a few things because this is somewhat in my wheelhouse of doing investigations of bias and discrimination. And I acknowledge that a lot of the bylaws will probably address some of the issues that I will bring up. So I just wanted to bring them to the commissioners' attention as something to look for in the bylaws, or that council might be able to answer as far as what's included in the actual policy. The definition of a complaint is an expression of dissatisfaction, and if it can be proved to be true. Those are 2 phrases used in that. There is no standard of proof cited. So, for example, in Title IX, it's preponderance of the evidence. Criminal cases is to be under reasonable doubt, and to be pulled over, it's probable cause. So, there is a wide variation in the degree of those standards that I would just hope might be addressed in that to show that we are taking those complaints seriously. As far as unsatisfied, in 12504B1, if someone is unsatisfied with a complaint, they can bring it to the board when a decision has been made. It does not address the standard of review that would be used, whether that would be de novo, reviewing all of the evidence that was presented completely again, or if that would just be if there was an error within the process that unduly prejudiced the decision that was made. The time frame for reporting, they're able to take complaints to the LPD. It would be nice if there were a way to follow up to ensure that those were being investigated, because not everybody is going to be dissatisfied with a complaint. Generally, if the finding is a no finding, they will be dissatisfied with that complaint. However, otherwise, there is no way to ensure that those are happening in a timely manner. However, I'm sure that there are statutes that require the review process to occur in a timely manner. It's just not cited in this policy here. The city manager may consider the board's recommendation. This does not exactly indicate that this is a formal appeal process, and whether or not the recommendations made by this board will be taken seriously or have next steps, or what kind of written response a complainant might receive if they choose to appeal this to this board. And that is the extent of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers. If there's no public comment, like what if one of the complaints is the board isn't putting complaints on the agenda? Like, I mean, what if there's a complaint that someone's being ignored? Shouldn't they at least have the chance to address that in the public comment? Like, if there is like a corrupt board member that's hiding up for the police, I would just think that could cause problems, but allowing the public to have a public comment eases the public about the police, I think. I think the Lawrence police do a great job. I've lived in towns where there have been corrupt police, and I don't think we don't have much to worry about, because I think people in Lawrence are smart enough to figure out the truth from fiction, and if someone is making up false allegations, I think the people of Lawrence are smart enough to acknowledge that and to stand with the police. Oops, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. There is something in here that allows us to remove a board member. Any other public comment? Okay, so we'll bring it back to the commission.
I think it says a lot for the community that you have a LPOA that, with very few exceptions, endorsed this idea. I think there's a lot of communities where there would have been very active resistance from the police department for such an idea, and so I applaud our Police Officers Association for their willingness to work with this, and you know, I thought their suggestions make a lot of sense. I think we do owe it to our community to have public comment, but I think we also owe it to our police department to put forth a policy that protects them and protects their due process. So I think we need to be very careful how we go about doing that. And if we do offer a public comment section, I would strongly encourage us to, at the very minimum, offer language that speaks to, that's available to all who attend the meeting, that speaks to the fact that specific allegations are to be made in confidence and not to be made as part of the public comment section. And then, of course, we would need to make sure that the members we chose for our board understood how to run such a meeting to enable that to actually take place.
You know, I agree with Commissioner Herbert on everything that he just brought up. I think we are down to a point where we're probably talking about the one section that talks about general public comment and how we're going to allow it, if we're going to allow it, and what's going to take place. One of the things that concerns me about all of this, and City Manager, I appreciate your comments and all the work that's been done by staff and everybody that's been involved in this ordinance, and I think it's something that we all want to support. But I think as a voting member of this body representing the public and also feeling, an important representation of any one of our employees, has to do with the fact, are there safeguards in this ordinance that will protect that individual if their name is brought up? And right now, that is the one part that I'm having a hard time dealing with. And I mean, the rest of it, I'm fine.
I agree with Commissioner Herbert, and I think we need to build the safeguards.
That seems to be done by the bylaws, through the bylaw process?
Well,
That's what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, it has to be done. We need to protect the officers, individual officers, if they've only been accused and not investigated. Definitely so. The other thing I would like to add, though, is regarding this training. I would like to make sure that whatever training that they are receiving, that it is a certified program, taught by a certified trainer. Because my concern is if they're making decisions on bias, we need to make sure that they have the proper full training on how to proceed with investigating something along that line.
I had a question about the liaison. It's in section 2505. It says the chief may designate an employee of the city to be his liaison to the board, which is fine and dandy, but I'm not seeing a staff liaison. Would that be something that would be in the ordinance? Because you mentioned something about a legal liaison. Would we have someone from the legal department as the official staff liaison, or who would that be?
No, I think that the idea is that it would be the chief or her designee would be the typical liaison to that. We have liaisons to all our boards and commissions.
Right.
They cross from department to department depending on the type of activity that they're dealing with. I think the suggestion was that legal counsel would add some stiffening to those difficult decisions that need to be rendered on the spot. And you'll hear Council Wheeler step in on occasion and encourage you to refer back to the law and get you back to a point where you're maybe not heading down a path that you were starting down. And I think that was kind of the idea, but that can happen regardless.
I think I'd like to see
at the
something like
invitation
that.
of the chief or that person's or her designee as well, to bring other people into that process.
Yeah. I think I'd like to see them added as an ex officio member, of course.
Well, that's different than a staff liaison.
Mm-hmm. What would you recommend then would be the appropriate way to have that?
I think you could leave it with the chief or their designee and such other persons as they determine necessary for any given meeting. I mean, because, some of the meetings may not necessitate the city attorney or a member of the attorney's staff to actually be there. I think we're kind of getting into some pretty fine detail as to the operations of this, and there's another level that has to come back to you, as we determined earlier, with the bylaws that all have to come back that should specify some of the, I think, the more detailed types of concerns that you have that can be baked into that. And because of the lead time that Maria talked about in terms of these board members are not just like board members from some of our more civilian-type boards. They're going to have background checks. So I think what you could insist on is that before the board is fully functional, that the bylaws are all in place before it actually is up and running. But before we start down the process of bylaws, I would encourage you to move forward with the ordinance and indicate that the timing would start at such time as the commission has approved the bylaws and you have a fully vetted board with all the necessary backgrounds done before it started up. And I think that can address those concerns.
When you're talking about lead time, Tom, are you considered March 1st, January 1st? What is the time frame?
Well, what is it right now? We're at the beginning of September, so yeah, I think you could make it March 1st and it'd work just fine.
Okay. And
I think we'd have enough time to get that done.
And going back to the bylaws, you know, the approval by this body of those bylaws, would that include the comments brought forward by LPOA? Is that where we address them? Or do we address them in the ordinance?
I think that's where you'd address them. And the way the ordinance is worded is, I think that they're kind of evolved by the board itself with approval of the city commission. But I think what I would suggest you do is you have a template of your work rules in place, bylaws in place before you actually start the operation. And then they can come back to you and make amendments. Those amendments are subject to your approval later anyway.
Okay, so then could we condition, and I ask this just as a question, could we condition the final approval of this ordinance based on the approval of those bylaws coming back?
Well, I think it's in the ordinance that you would adopt anyway. And I think what you could do is by subsequent motion is give us direction that this is not to be implemented until those are reviewed and approved by this board.
I just want to make sure that that's
Yeah, I think
understood, and
that's
I
a very-
think that that's where we all
Yeah.
need to be heading.
Yep.
Okay. I think I read it like that, I just want to make sure I heard it come out of somebody, so. Okay.
Any other commission discussion? So, would you like to make the motion, Commissioner Amix?
Well, yeah, are we done with discussion?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, Commissioner, did you get all of your questions answered, or is that part of the bylaws also, the,
Some of it could be, yeah,
the certification stuff?
Certifications that I
Yeah.
think you were asking for.
yeah. That would all be
Before
part
the
of it.
second reading.
Okay.
Okay. I just want to make sure that's part of the either ordinance or bylaws or however, whatever's going to provide the most protection for the members
Okay.
as well as the officers.
Okay, so, and I'm going to ask it another way then. Could the bylaws come back before the second and final reading of this ordinance?
They could, I suppose. I'm not sure that's necessary if you're
Well,
giving
I believe it
direction.
is. I believe it is, at least for me. Okay, now, it may not be for a majority of the commission, but I think that, I think it's something that's important. I think the ordinance is one thing, the bylaws are something else. And I think that, that is important to me anyway.
But I think it's the same effect by saying that it can't go into effect until you've reviewed and approved the bylaws.
That's fine, as long as, the ordinance will be in effect, though, if it goes through second reading, right?
But by motion, you can restrict that it not start up until such time as you have approved the bylaws and that those are in place. You can set that threshold yourselves.
If I could, on page 6 of the ordinance, section 4 says this ordinance shall take effect and be in force after. We could insert the date March 1, 2017. And then you could direct us to bring the
further
bylaws and have the bylaws approved before that date. So we are trying to leave some time for these matters that have to be addressed, give us some lead time to do that.
Okay. So then, if the bylaws would never be approved for whatever reason, this ordinance just becomes null and void?
Well, on page 1 of the ordinance, or that section that I referred to you earlier, that section of the ordinance says that those bylaws have to come back to the commission.
Right.
So, and have to be approved by the commission. If you pass the ordinance and it's not effective until March 1, we have a duty to bring those bylaws back to you and get them approved.
Okay.
And we wouldn't, I mean, that is our intention. That would be our intention.
And this commission and future commissions always retain the right to repeal or amend.
Got it. Okay.
Does that satisfy your concerns?
I guess one of the things, where did it go? So, even though the ordinance talks about at this point, talks about the public comment, public comment essentially being allowed, but not allowing, talk of any specific officer. That is not approved until such time as those bylaws are approved.
No, if you approve the ordinance, you would have to direct us to amend that section. Otherwise, we would approve the ordinance as it is written unless you direct us otherwise.
Okay. I just want to make sure I've got everything down. Okay.
And along those same lines, if Commissioner Larson wanted us to change the definition of bias-based policing to include gender identity,
Yeah, I was
we would
just
have
about
to
to
get
ask
that direction in a motion tonight.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you approve the ordinance as written, it's as written.
So our motion needs to include gender identity if we want.
So your motion needs to include whatever it is you wish to alter.
Mhm. Thank you.
Okay. Got it.
Any other commission discussion?
I guess what I'm hearing is that we put the March 1st date on it, we had gender identity. Is
Yeah.
that,
And I would like to also change the part about public comment until such time as the bylaws are approved, and then that would be reflected in the ordinance at that time. Is that okay?
And we're going to add it seemed to me that we were going to add the other two additions from the LPOA,
Absolutely.
correct?
Yeah.
That the
Yes.
only one we were having conversation about was the public comment?
Right.
So that, what I assume would need to be part of this motion's getting quite lengthy. But
Yeah. But here again, if we pull out the section that deals with public comment right now until such time as the bylaws are written, and then those changes would be made into the new ordinance, correct? Or into the ordinance? With the bylaws, right?
The public, I think the way I'd suggest you do it is the public comment section does not go into effect until the commission's approved bylaws governing how that works.
I would accept that.
Yeah. So that is what that is, section.
Where is? I don't know, I was looking at so many things.
It's the last,
Last page,
section 25.
07,
um,
2511.
10.
2510
Section B.
B.
Yep.
Yeah, it's on page 6. Okay.
So,
All right. Would someone like to?
yeah, I'm getting it here in a second.
Yeah.
I got to write all
You got
this
it all
out.
written it down?
Yeah, give me a minute.
Okay.
Well,
got one
he's right, and I
question.
was gonna.
I got one question for
Oh,
Tony.
go ahead.
Tony, is there any reason why we wouldn't, would you not recommend adding any of the other two items that the LPOA wants to add in there that's not already in there. That was item number 3 on the memo and number 5, where they wanted to add the word members. Do you have any problem with that?
No.
Okay, that's fine then.
Okay, I think I got the motion here.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so I would move that we adopt on first reading ordinance number 9324 with the addition of 2 items as requested by the LPOA in section 2507 and adding the term members to section 2502, as well as the addition of gender identity to the definition of biased police, as well as the exclusion of section 2510B until such time as the commission has adopted and voted on bylaws. So,
I think it's these. It would not be implemented until such time. To exclude it means you'd have to add it back in by ordinance at some point in the future, the way I would interpret that. I think you're trying to make it subject to the rules and regs.
okay. So making section 2510B subject to the adoption of
Rules
approved
and regs
bylaws.
by the city commission.
We got all that? You want me to do that again? Good, thank you.
Are we including the staggered? Do we
And
need to include that in the
the
motion?
staggered.
Kind of
You mentioned
We
that.
put that in the bylaws, Kim.
Yeah,
Is that
that's
bylaws?
bylaws.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then
Thank you, Sharon.
I've got it.
Thank you.
It'll look really
We've
good.
got the March 1st date on it, too.
No, we
Matthew?
haven't had a
Matthew?
Has that been made? That motion been made?
Did you also include the March 1st implementation date?
No, I didn't.
I was going to give you I was going to give you help on that, but I was going to do it by amendment.
It takes a village.
Whatever.
Okay.
So to include March 1st?
Yes,
Okay,
that's under section 4.
March 1st effective date.
Second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Herbert, seconded by Commissioner Amix. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all for coming out for this. All right, so now we're on to number 2. Let me scroll back down here. Conduct a public hearing regarding the sale of alcohol by Culinaria Food and Wine at 512 East 9th Street, Suite A.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. The item before you is a distance limitation waiver for Culinaria Food and Wine at 512 East 9th Street. Culinaria currently holds a caterer's license. This license allows them to serve on unlicensed premises, and this does include their principal place of business. This location is within 400 feet of a church and a school, St. Luke's AMA Church and New York Elementary School. City code restricts the sale of alcohol within 400 feet of a church or school. So Culinaria regularly sponsors events at this location, and they would like to continue to do so. So staff has recommended they seek the distance waiver for the premise as opposed to each time they hold an event at this location. So a request for a waiver was submitted, and the church and school were notified. We have not received comment or communication from either the church or the school. So the next step is to hold a public hearing, and then if you, at the conclusion of the hearing, find that the proximity of the sale of alcohol is not adverse to the public welfare or safety, then you would grant that waiver.
Does this take into account 55% food sales, or this doesn't have any limitation?
It does not.
And this is for any day of the week? It's like a regular liquor license?
It's a caterer's license.
Oh, this still is a caterer's license.
Mm-hmm. But I would say that state statute does allow caterers to serve up to 7 days under a catered event. They do have to give notice of that to ABC each time they do that. That is not their current plan, as I understand it, but I just want to make it clear that they could do that under a caterer's license, but any caterer could do that.
So they already have a caterer's license?
Yes, they do.
And we're just extending the time period for it?
We're not changing the license. They can serve on unlicensed premises. So caterers, their location is not licensed. So they notify the state alcohol beverage control that each time they're going to have an event. And then they also have to, by our code, notify the chief of police. Then they can do an event on an unlicensed premise. And these are generally temporary events. Well, they are temporary events. So their location, as a caterer, you can also serve at your location. So their location is not licensed, but it happens to be within 400 feet of a church or school. So when they do host temporary events at their location, instead of each time they do that having to go through this process, we would grant them, they're requesting we grant them a waiver for the premise, similar to what we did for Soli and Hank's.
The cider gallery?
Hank's Charcuterie. I don't believe Cider Gallery needed it because I don't think they're within 400 feet of a church or school.
Oh, right, this is just the distance waiver.
Right.
Right. Okay, any other questions for staff? Okay, thank you. So let's do public comment. Any public comment on this item?
K.T. Welsh, East Lawrence Neighborhood Association. Our president is backpacking in Canada, so I'm here. They did come and talk to the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association, and there was some mix-up about licenses and how this was all going to work, and they explained it all to us. And our only issue is that this ordinance seems really antiquated, and for years I've come to these meetings and watched people get waivers over and over, and occasionally a preacher will get up and talk about liquor, but it almost seems silly to have it on the books. So thank you.
Thank you, KT. Any other public comment?
Yeah, a little bit ago, like a few meetings ago, I kind of commented on something similar about someone looking for a liquor license. It is absolutely ridiculous that in Lawrence, a college town, that's liberal, that we have these ordinances about 400 feet from a church. It's just ridiculous. If the church people don't want to get drunk, just don't go to where they're serving alcohol. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any other public comment on this item? Okay.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Oh, I didn't officially open it, did I? Did I officially open it by calling public comment? Do I need to officially? Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Then we'll unofficially close it. Second.
All right, so motion.
I'm confused
So we
at this
still,
point. We
do I
probably
still
need to do a motion to open the public hearing.
Okay.
I move we open the public hearing.
Second.
All right, so motion made by Vice Mayor Bully and seconded by Commissioner Larson to open the public hearing. Is there any other public comment?
Do you want to vote on that?
Oh, we should vote. I was in Colorado for a
Take
week
2 weeks
too.
off
I think
is
my
what
mind
happens,
is a
right?
little off as well. Out of practice.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
trying to help.
So before we close it though, let's make sure no one else has any public comment on this item. Okay, so would someone like to close the public hearing?
Yeah, I already did.
Let's do it officially now.
Vote. Vote.
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Amick, seconded by Commissioner Larson to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Very good.
You gotta keep me on my toes.
I'm trying.
Thank you,
I'll
Vice
make
Mayor.
Mayor, if you're ready for a motion, I'll make
Please.
a motion that, finding that the culinary food and wine of 512 East 9th Street, Suite A, is not adverse to the public welfare or safety, and we approve a grant, or we approve the grant distance limitation waiver.
Second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Amick, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right. So now we're on to number 3. Consider approving using the 2018 to 2022 capital improvement plan as the spending plan for the 0.3% infrastructure and equipment sales tax.
Give me just a second to pull the agenda back up.
Approval? Plan? Does it not say that on the memo?
Sorry for the technical difficulties. Mayor, Commissioners, Casey Toomey, I'm an Assistant City Manager here for the city, and tonight we're going to talk about our recommendation for the City Commission to approve using the capital improvement plan as the spending plan for the 0.3% infrastructure and equipment sales tax, assuming that that sales tax is approved by voters. Just to recap, we came to you previously and asked for permission to place 3 ballot questions on the ballot for this November's general election, and the City Commission did authorize staff to place those ballot questions on the ballot. One being the 0.2% sales tax, which is a renewal for operations of the city's transit system, a 0.3, which is also a renewal for infrastructure and fire medical equipment, and a 0.05, which the Commission authorized repurposing from transit to affordable housing. So those ballot initiatives have been provided to the county, and the affidavit of publication was received today. So we are on track to have those ballot questions appear on this November's ballot. Again, this is a renewal of 2 of those sales taxes that are set to sunset at the end of March 2019. So this is doesn't change. Those sales taxes will remain in place as they exist now until the end of March 2019. And if the voters approve, the new sales taxes will start in April of 2019. At one of our meetings, we presented a draft spending plan for that infrastructure and equipment sales tax. As we talked, there were several questions about a number of projects that appeared on that plan. Some of the questions were because those projects relied on other funding sources, which caused some confusion, I think, for members of the public and for staff as well. We went back after that meeting pursuant to a request from you all to bring back a spending plan. And when staff put our heads together, we sort of realized that we have a spending plan. One significant difference between now and back in 2008 is the fact that we have a capital improvement plan and a capital improvement planning process. The city did not have that back in 2008. And so instead, we created a separate spending plan for the infrastructure sales tax. That would not be staff's recommendation at this point for a number of reasons. First, it's important to remember that the ballot language, which I tried to pull up here so that people could read it, provides the parameters for the permissible uses of that sales tax. You can see here that it talks about the purposes of constructing, improving, and maintaining streets, sidewalks, stormwater facilities, recreational trails, bikeways, and paths, including residential traffic calming devices, residential curb and gutter replacement, improvements to crosswalks and accessible ramps, reconstruction of roads and intersections, purchasing fire apparatus and related fire equipment, including radios and personal protective equipment. And then there is also language that says such other related street, sidewalk, stormwater, and recreational path infrastructure, and fire equipment purposes as may be in the best interest of the city. So it's important to remember that that is what is legally permissible to use those sales tax proceeds for the 0.3 sales tax, assuming that it's approved by voters. Some of the other reasons why we think it's important from staff's perspective to use our CIP One, it was already adopted by you all, so for the years 2018 through 2022, you've already identified projects that would be funded. When that CIP was prepared, staff made the assumption that the .3 sales tax for infrastructure and equipment would be in place. We've attached to your agenda item tonight a report that pulls out those projects that were included in the current CIP for funding that will through the infrastructure sales tax. And we can go over those in more detail if you're interested. Second, having and using a CIP is very consistent with your strategic plan and two of your critical success factors. One, innovative infrastructure and asset management, and two, sound fiscal stewardship. We think that using the CIP is more transparent and easier for the public to rely on than using a separate plan. Our current CIP process allows for public input. It allows for the City Commission to approve the projects that are included in the particular 5-year span of the CIP. It allows flexibility that's needed for the span of time that we're talking about. Standing here in 2017, it's difficult to project what revenues are going to be like in 2027, 2028. I can't even say that year out loud. It doesn't seem possible that we'll be talking about 2027. But it's also difficult to predict what the city's priorities are going to be. Again, one of the most important reasons why we have a multiple year long-range financial plan for capital improvements is because you want to prioritize across all of the city's needs. Creating a separate spending plan for just this infrastructure sales tax would be the opposite of that. It would be looking at the priorities not only in isolation by funding source, but also it would only be looking at these items that are listed here and their equipment and improvements, and those are really just one category of improvements that we need. We've talked to you about our city facility needs and other capital improvement needs that are not listed here, and prioritizing these projects within just this funding source seems inconsistent with having a capital improvement plan. Having said all of that, the CIP that we did adopt, that you all did adopt, does identify a number of what I'm considering to be annual programs.
Casey, will you pull up the CIP on there just so
Sure.
people at home can see as well?
Oops. So this is a good, I don't know again if I make that any bigger if people will be able to see it. This is a good example of those annual programs that I'm talking about. Sidewalk/bike/ped/ADA improvements. There is a program there and then an amount of money over the 5 years of the current CIP. Staff is actively working on a prioritization for that pot of funding pursuant to direction that they received from you all at a previous meeting, and they'll come back to you with that prioritization. Similar, you'll see down here contracted street maintenance program. This was a program in our existing infrastructure sales tax, and staff's recommendation is that, and the commission has approved, that program will continue. That process prioritizes streets using our PCI and other factors to come up with an annual program to address the highest priority street, residential street projects in any particular given year. So again, those annual prioritization projects are allow staff and the public a better understanding of the city's priorities, some flexibility to adjust if revenues come in way above what we originally projected or way below. We have a process already in place so that it's transparent for the public to understand what projects we're talking about and if changes need to be made based on the volatility of sales tax and how those revenues come in. We have a process in place to make those changes. So having said all of that, I'll be happy to answer questions, but that's all I have for tonight.
Any questions? Okay, well, let's go to public comment. I think we have a gentleman here that's been waiting for a little while. Thank you for your patience.
Not a problem at all.
Just say your name and sign in and tell us what you think.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Austin, and I'm a resident here, Lawrence, Kansas, and I have a quick story to tell. When I was young, I lived in New York City, and I'm sure you guys all know it's a place with a very high sense of fashion. Everyone, my friends included, had high-value jeans, expensive shirts, jean jackets. At the time, it was the 90s. And I had spent every dollar I had just that I could be like them, just that I could mimic their appearance and finally feel like I was accepted or cool. Unfortunately, or rather, should I say fortunately, my poor financial skills prompted my mom and dad to give me some sage advice. They told me, don't go broke trying to look rich. I had to know what I was capable of, financially speaking, and I had to live within that type of means. And that's kind of what I wish for you all to come away with today as we talk about the CIP and, of course, the tax increase that's associated with it. Right now, as we speak, Lawrence ranks about 92 out of 803 districts that impose a sales tax. When we consider, of course, these two renewals as well as the increase that happens up in April, that ranking will grow. Not only that, but if you consider about the transportation districts that are here within the city of Lawrence, then that means that Laurentians as well as outsiders will come into the city and pay a sales tax higher than Nebraska Furniture Mart or the Legend shopping area or most areas in Johnson County. The level of sales tax that's going to be imposed on this city is going to act as a signal that Lawrence is an economically successful and vibrant place to be and shop. It implicitly tells Kansans that Lawrence areas are more commercially vibrant than places in Johnson County or the Legends. And we all know, as much as we love this city, that it's not true. So the latest data from the BEA says that the city of Lawrence, or should I say the metro area for Lawrence, didn't experience any economic growth over the past year. And now with the budget items that we are discussing today, including the tax increases, we are asking for low-income Laurentians to pay for a sales tax on goods and services as if they lived right next door to Oak Park Mall. I ask for this body to live within its means, to finance spending through real growth, endogenous growth, and to realize it cannot continue to go to my parents, should I say taxpayers, and expect to be better off and grow. I was lucky enough to learn that lesson early on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item?
Good evening. I'm Michael Allman from the Sustainability Action Network. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. First of all, back in June 20th, staff put together a memo about the spending plan for pedestrian bicycle projects at that point relative to discussion of the Queens Road street construction and how funds can get apportioned and allocated depending on whether it's from Public Works budget, from bike ped funds, or from special assessment. I just want to say I appreciate the memo and the analysis that staff put together that described the Commission's view of that. That said, one thing of concern in there is that it points out that whether or not the sales tax does pass, there still remains the question that the ballot wording does not specify any particular amount for bicycle pedestrian. It's just rolled into the whole 0.3%. So that question remains and will have to be addressed yearly or in a 5-year plan or whatever. And of concern for we at Sustainability Action, who are bicycle advocates, staff pointed out that if street construction projects can't use bicycle pedestrian funds, then that ratio may shift, and there may have to be fewer funds for bicycle pedestrian so that motor vehicle street projects can proceed. We don't think it needs to be an either-or. For 17 years now, Public Works and the city general funds have paid for street construction projects since the bicycle lane policy was adopted in 2000. Public Works paid for any attendant bicycle pedestrian things to street construction projects. That was reinforced again when the Complete Streets policy was passed, I think was it 2006? Public Works has been paying for those complete street bicycle pedestrian things all along. So at this point, to say that, like in the Queens Road project, those funds will have to be bicycle pedestrian and can't come from Public Works is a fallacy, and this memo pointed that out. Nevertheless, how do we apportion those funds? If we have a certain street project and we want to fulfill the Complete Streets policy, Public Works needs to pay for that like they have for 17 years. We shouldn't be taking the bike ped funds to do that.
Gotta wrap it up, Michael.
What I want to point out is that the funds that will go to that street project either need to come from Public Works for all facilities, bicycle pedestrian included, or a mix of Public Works and Special Assessment Benefit District. In Queens Road, for some reason, the Benefit District didn't include bicycle pedestrian. Well, it should. That policy, that resolution for special assessments needs to be addressed to make sure that when a development comes in, the developers have rolled into their costs that go to the property purchasers the expense for bicycle and pedestrian.
Thank you, Michael.
And the spending plan that you're considering, also, it should be considered a draft staff proposal every year, that the line items for bicycle pedestrian then go to the commission during public budget hearing. It's just, the spending plan should just be a draft staff proposal, and you make the decisions on those projects.
Thank you,
line
Michael.
item by line item.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Frank Jansen, 33 New Hampshire. My friends and I, we aren't sure about the description of this infrastructure and equipment sales tax, so you can answer this. Is this going to be a real sales tax throughout all the purchases in town, or just a certain amount of items? Is it going to be like for groceries and things, or just?
We'll get to your question and answered after public comment. Thank you, Frank. Any other public comment? Okay, so as to Frank's question there, who wants to answer that?
You need taxable items.
It's the same as
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same as it is now. It's sales tax for all sales.
This ballot language is what we can use the proceeds for, not what the taxes are on.
Right.
It's how we use those proceeds. But
Because
yeah,
this isn't
sales tax.
it's not a different tax increase, it's an extension of the 10-year ago tax increase.
Right.
Thank you, Frank. All right, any other commission discussion? I already called public comment.
Is that it?
I think that almost everyone has spoken here, except for this nice lady in the front, and Courtney. And a lady in the back. All right, so let's close public comment officially. Any commission discussion?
I like the idea.
I just assumed this is what we would be using to.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused as to why this is on the agenda. 'Cause
Well, I mean, I think we did have the draft plan, and staff went back and said, you know, we've already got a plan, let's
Okay.
see if it's okay to use that one. And I think these are examples, it's really the ballot language that controls the spending authority, and that's what the public should consider when they decide to vote against or for this. But these are examples of what we would be doing with it.
Any other commission discussion?
I guess as we went through the process of the budget and especially through the CIP and talked about, the extension of the question, I really kind of thought that we already kind of had this discussion, but I understand that it kind of cleans everything up and shows specific direction as to where the monies are going to go. So that's fine. Nothing wrong with that.
It's definitive now.
It is now.
I like that.
transparent.
That's good.
I just hope folks take the opportunity to vote, regardless of whether they vote for it or against it. We had a historically low August turnout, so maybe let's step up our game in November. Let your voice be heard.
Would anyone like to make the motion?
I move that we approve using the 2018-22 capital improvement plan as the spending plan for the 0.3% infrastructure and equipment sales tax.
Second.
Motion made by Vice Mayor Boley, seconded by Commissioner Larson. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, so now that concludes our regular agenda. Now, commission items.
I guess I talked about this a little bit in our earlier issue. I took the pardon of Sheriff Joe Arpaio pretty hard. I believe in the rule of law, and I think it's important for us to state our expectation and appreciation of our law enforcement officers, that they protect the constitutional rights of everyone in our city. And I think that has to be what this commission supports. I think we all took an oath to defend the Constitution, and I think it's very important for us as commissioners to make sure that the message that goes to our citizens is that we value everyone and we value everyone's rights. And I'd like that to be the message that we send as a commission to the staff. So I guess that's my piece to say.
Very good.
I agree. I think that's a very important distinction.
I think we do have a good police force, and I appreciate that they take these things seriously as they do their work. And I think we have to take them seriously as we do our work.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Any other commission items? All right, let's move on to the city manager's report.
We have a couple things to report on this evening. You know that we entered into a settlement agreement, a First Amendment, with the 12th and Oriat Tax Income and Financing District. And as a part of that agreement, Mr. Fritzl resigned as co-manager and developers representative of the Oriat Inn Limited Corporation, Liability Corporation. So we were in the process or in the position where we needed to appoint two persons to serve in those capacities, and part of the agreement called for the developer to have a role in that and the city manager to have a role in that. So we have come to the conclusion that Sandra Prager will serve as co-manager and developers representatives under the amended redevelopment agreement. Ms. Prager has a very strong record in public service, having served as the Kansas Insurance Commissioner, a state senator, a Lawrence City Commissioner, and the city's mayor. The other co-manager is Denise Lane, and Denise is a CPA here. So we'll be in the process now of implementing our first audit of the books to make sure that things are working the way we had discussed and agreed to in the agreement, and that will be taking place. And of course, that audit will be paid for by the Oriat Inn Corporation. We're also working on another issue, and that issue is the unpaid land lease and related payments by Riverfront LLC. The Riverfront LLC is owned by the Simons family in large part, and they, represented by their attorneys, have been meeting with the city staff to get that issue resolved. I think we're making progress in that regard. I think we have a ways to go yet, but I'm more positive that we will get to a conclusion and bring that back for commission's ratification at some point in the not too distant future. Remember that came about as a result of finding some concerns with our accounts receivable. That was one of the big ticket items. That is the largest item that came out. And depending on which side you listen to, that underbilling or that lack of billing is in an amount approaching over $250,000. So that was a significant number. I do want to mention just a few things about where we're at with the accounts receivable report. We hired a company referred to as RSM US LLP. They have a number of follow-up items. You know, originally they did what was referred to as a rapid assessment that took place in April of 2017. And then we hired them to do a deeper dive into our accounts, figure out if in fact we did have other places where we were missing accounts receivable. We did find that. What they did is they developed a survey, and they went through and surveyed, I think it's close to 50 of our staff members for accounts receivable, and we started matching those things up with our books to make sure that we were actually billing and receiving funds. Sometimes I think it was simply a communication problem that was occurring, and in some cases it was things weren't being kept up to date, and like in the Riverfront, we totally missed a significant account receivable in terms of collectibles back to the city. So we started collecting all that information on any non-utility related billings. We created a master list of all received contracts and compared the data to what we would normally refer to as a MAR, or our miscellaneous accounts receivable funds or accounts, and verified with the appropriate department directors whether those were the ones they were aware of, and were there any others that we knew of. Additionally, the city's billing team reviewed the items identified in the assessment as needing additional review, and overall these items were found to be paid pretty much appropriately. There's a number of items, you know, under all of those categories. I'm trying to summarize as best I can. From the review, the following corrective actions were identified. Regular billing of land rental owned by Riverfront LLC should be reinstated, and that's what I mentioned in the earlier item. Rent amounts for several airport hangar leases should be adjusted as outlined in the agreements. There was a place where we weren't keeping up to date as to future adjustments. You know, there's ratchets, usually inflationary kickers that are built into a lot of agreements, and I think those were missed. And then the city should implement a centralized management system for all right-of-way agreements. We have significant right-of-way agreements for fiber, cell towers, utility franchises, anything where those lines have been run in our public rights-of-way. There is usually an agreement associated with those. We delved into those pretty deeply to make sure that we were receiving our payments for those. Finally, we'll finalize policies and procedures related to the updated process. I think, and that's probably one of the more critical things. It's a very general comment. There's a lot of detail backing that comment up. And you can read the report, which is also online. So if the public's interested in that, they can take a look at it. But at the end of the day, what we've tried to do is really ensconce some procedures that cause us to monitor this in a much more management, regimented kind of approach to things going forward, which I would say significantly reduces our chance of missing these things going forward. But the reality is much of this is controlled by humans, and humans make mistakes. So we're going to have to revisit these things going forward like we do in a lot of our items. But I really acknowledge the work of Brian Kidney and kind of pulling some of this stuff out and kind of wondering, how deep it was and raising this issue to my office. And so we've taken it very seriously, and I just wanted to give you this update to show the kind of progress that we're making. The next item I wanted to bring up is, you recall that I reported out on the farmland remediation project status. And one of the best things I can say that I've seen come out of this is kind of a very strong relationship that's been created, connected, the cooperation between this city and KDHE, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, kind of renewed my faith in being able to work with a state agency. They were very understanding. I think they were very helpful. So I view them as a real partner in trying to figure out this problem. As you know, this is a former remediation site called the Farmland and Industries Nitrogen Plant Site. We had a plan in place where we would take this nitrogen and move it to farms where they would use it basically as a fertilizer. And it was a pollutant from our standpoint, but we were able to pipe it across and under the Kansas River into farmland. Changes in that farmland as simple as converting a sod farm to rotational crops, and maybe different rotational crops that didn't absorb and use as much nitrogen, nitrogenated water as we produced. Really created some storage capacity issues for us, and rain obviously surcharges that amount and causes those pumps to run a little bit more. KDHE came up with a suggestion that we turn the pumps off for a while and not extract that while we study this issue, so that we weren't forced into just reacting with a solution. And so we've done that, and I think if you read the report, that's actually taken place, and we're now monitoring that. At the same time, we're looking for additional places where we can deliver this nitrogenated water for fertilizer purposes to farmland in and around the area. Obviously, the piping system is a much more efficient way to do this. I think they're also talking about deep injection wells that we might use. But one of the things that was initially proffered as a suggestion was to truck this material, and that's a very expensive proposition. But they've given us some breathing room. I can tell you, in having served now, I think in 5 different states, not all state environmental agencies would have reacted the way your Kansas agency did. I think, again, I'm really pleased with how they reacted, and I look forward to that kind of continued cooperation and investigation and research into how to solve this problem. Hopefully together we'll come up with some, new idea that wasn't painfully obvious to begin with. But I think we're going to have some tough realities before this is all done anyway, but it's nice to know that we got some good cooperation out of our state, quite frankly.
I did have an idea, how at the 2nd and Indiana water treatment, that we have an area that people can come and fill up their trucks with water, and they use it for irrigation or whatever, like companies. Is it possible for us to have people?
I'll ask about it. I don't know if that's, if that would have a significant impact or not.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big issue.
Yeah.
But, sure, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Brandon.
Brandon will take some home tonight with him.
Fill up the water bottle. Well, we've been bouncing, brainstorming ideas around, me and the project team for the last several weeks, and we've thought about doing something like that. With this type of situation, though, especially being a regulated and permitted activity, we really need some quality controls in place, some checks in place. If we would do something like that, we would most likely have a permitting requirement to do pre and post samples of the soil. So something like that would actually probably end up costing us more than it would save us. That being said, we are looking at the potential to partner with Parks and Recreation. We have a non-potable water truck that we go around and we water medians, and sometimes you see that in front of City Hall watering the plants and trees. This water is fertilizer. It's nitrogen. So although there's really no market value to it, we have a 750-gallon non-potable water truck in the city fleet that may be of some help. We're dealing with millions of gallons, so one 750-gallon load is not even a drop in the bucket. But yeah, it's an interesting idea, and we've thought about that and others as well. So.
Thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda for reports was the East 9th Street reconstruction project. And basically what we've done is I asked the staff to just give us a quick summary of what the costs were so that those are broken out. Overall, the total project cost is $2.5 million, which includes the construction cost of $1.8, the contingency of $200,000, engineering costs of about $170,000. So those are all rolled into this entire amount, but there were some questions asked about that, and I wanted to make sure you knew what those numbers were. Public Works Street Division staff competed in the annual snow rodeo, one of the more fun events I think that our Public Works crew gets to do, and in the non-snow season. And you know that I've come from a much more northern environment, and snow rodeos up there are a big deal in Minnesota and Michigan and even Iowa. But Caleb Pettengill and Arlie Watts, who probably don't get to hear their names mentioned in a city commission meeting very often, placed as finalists in the gold, silver, bronze category, and so we congratulate them for being competitive. This sounds like fun and games, but the reality is I'm pretty confident they all learn a little bit different techniques watching what each one does, and they get to talk to each other from different departments and have some experience that way. And that, quite frankly, builds that kind of camaraderie you want across different cities in the state and in the region. So things like hurricanes that hit, or tornadoes that hit, or wildfires that hit, you have some starting connection communications there with people that can move in and help each other in mutual aid situations. So I don't diminish the value of those. I think those are actually a good thing for our operations. Next is the update on the planned street events coming up. I counted them. Between now and December 2nd, we have 18 different street public events going on, and of course that culminates with our 25th annual Christmas parade, which I was fortunate enough, along with Mayor Soden, to ride in one of the horse-drawn carriages last year, and I was really amazed at how well attended and how well behaved the horses were.
And the mayor, too.
And the mayor. Yeah. Anyway, it was a lot of fun, and it's really a nice event for our community. It's something very different. I grew up in a little town in southern Minnesota, and we had what was referred to as a sleigh and cutter festival. And they literally had, the rails out every year. And as time went on, we had less and less snow, and then they started trucking snow in to use. And now I think they've mounted the sleigh and cutters all on wheels now. So, Transportation Commission update. We had a Complete Streets policy review. In fact, we had the National Complete Streets Coalition held a workshop here in Lawrence on June 20. 6 of our transportation commissioners attended and participated in that. And as a result of that, the commission unanimously approved forming a committee involving Commissioners Schwartz, Dillon, and Evans to start reviewing our policy here locally. So I think they got some good ideas out of that, and they're going to take a hard look at our current policy. You also have reports on our monthly building permit activity, which still seems fairly vibrant, and the Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical Report. The next item I just mentioned briefly is Lawrence Transit System has won for the third straight year the greatest increase in ridership in our system compared to all the other systems in the state. Our own John Williams was a presenter at the CHEC Conference, which is the Conference for Higher Education Computing in Kansas. And John actually presented, and you'll like this, focused on IT management in a resource-restricted environment. I think that means we don't have that much money for all of these things. Anyway, he did such a nice job. He'll be invited back to the CHEC Conference to speak next year, and that will be at the University of Kansas. Future agenda items that we have scheduled for September 19th, we have 815 Vermont Street, the NRA request public hearing, a fair housing report, site plan appeal regarding the construction of 2 Greek houses at the end of Sigma New Place, live on Mass Street number 4 public hearing, adopt advisory board policy, which Diane has been heading up, first reading of an ordinance repealing the Joint Economic Development Council and amending the Public Incentives Review, one of the attempts to merge those operations. And for future work sessions on 9/12 next week, we have the OpenGov presentation and public access to finance data. And at the mayor's request, we have liquor license discussion that'll be on as well. And then on 10/17, we'll be discussing a proposal for a downtown conference center, and 11/14, the strategic plan update. That is my report for this evening.
All right, so we're on to calendar. Any items here that people need to add or change? Okay. So it looks like we're ready to adjourn. I'll move to adjourn. Motion made by Mayor Soden, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, everyone.
Welcome back.